This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Well, let's jump into some questions because we got so many. I was really blown away at the response we got. Let's champ. Any plans to bring back other ECW championships to the brand, like television or tag belts? I think it would have been cool to see Kurt as a Triple Crown winner if they had. Of course, we know it really just winds up being the world title. But do you remember there being plans that were shared with the talent of we're going to expand the roster and have all these different divisions?
Well, I knew they were going to expand the roster, but they didn't talk about tag titles or television titles. It would have been pretty cool, though, to be a Triple Crown winner of ECW. It would have added a lot of accomplishments to my list of accomplishments. So it would have been a very proud moment for me, but that was never talked about.
Denovius wants to say, who was one of the ECW originals that you wanted to wrestle the most, but never got the chance to?
I would say Dean Malenko. I was a big fan of Dean's, watching him in WCW. When he came to WWE, I was still a big fan of his. Him and Chris Benoit were two of the best technicians I've ever seen. And I definitely wanted to wrestle him before he retired, and it never happened.
Let's do another one here. Wyatt wants to know, do you have any stories from the ECW Arena house show? I was in attendance. I remember the crowd was on fire for you and Rob Van Dam.
Well, that's the match where I got injured. That's the main match where I, tore my hamstring, my groin, my abdominal muscle. I only wrestled in a few house shows for ECW before I quit. So there wasn't a lot that I did at that particular time. So I didn't spend a lot of time in ECW. I was there for, I think, a month.
Chronic wants to know, your remix theme, which you were used which I used when I was working out because it's awesome. Did you get to listen to it beforehand? And if so, did you like it?
Well, I listened to it beforehand. I didn't like it so much at first, but the more I listened to it, the catchier it got. I love my theme song. I love how catchy it is. It's a really cool song. It definitely represents who I was as a kid, and I wouldn't change it. It's the best entrance thing that I could ever have thought, imagine possible.
A lot of our listeners are fascinated with the whole musical component of this. Do they ever come to you and say, hey, which of these do you like better? Or do they just play you? Or do they even give you an option and just say, hey, here's your new theme music?
Well, they make a song for you, and then you'll show up at the arena and they'll play it out loud in the arena, and you decide if you like it or if you don't. But for the most part, they're basically saying, hey, this is the music we made for you. This is the music you're going to have to use. You can say you don't like it, and they'll go back and re-edit. For the most part, it's going to be identical to the first one they made.
Let's do the Chronic question because I think he's got a follow-up. We'll do his other side later. Dave wants to know, did you or some of the other wrestlers think that getting moved to the new ECW was a demotion? You've answered on your behalf. Did you talk to any other talent like Rob Van Dam, for instance? He's an ECW original. We know that he's in line for the big push. Does anybody feel like, man, I kind of been there, done that. I don't really want to do that again. I'd rather be on Raw or SmackDown.
I don't know. I think that Rob would have been excited about it, especially ECW being in the WWE. That for one, he's guaranteed a paycheck. So,
yeah.
That sometimes they didn't get him back in the 90s in ECW. So at least he knew that he was guaranteed a paycheck every week. And I think Rob would have been excited about ECW starting up again. That's where he made his name, and that's where, he got his reputation.
Did any of the characters, this is a question from Conrad in Huntsville, did any of the characters from the ECW original territory, when they start to come back, did you have any interesting interactions with any of them? Like when you used to seeing Randy Orton and Batista walk around backstage, and now here comes Balls Mahoney. So that's a departure, right?
Yes, it was different. Those guys are different, but they tell amazing stories, and they were very intriguing. But They were all cool to be around. They were great guys. They had great attitudes. I don't think ECW would have stood that long for that many years if they had bad attitudes in the locker room. I heard that their locker room had the best attitudes in the world, and that's why they were able to make it work, because everybody was agreeable with everyone.
Knowing what we know now,
had a fairly good run. I mean, they did last what, 5 years. So I mean, they did something right to that extent. But you know, I didn't think ECW was going to last forever. I knew that it would be a shooting star and that star would dim out eventually. But you know, it was a good try, and you know, Vince was excited about starting it. And when he's excited about something, he's dead set on doing it.
Ringside Rant Jones wants to know, were you used backstage in a coach role as well as an on-screen talent? That's an interesting question, because you do have a lot of guys there who don't know how to work the quote unquote WWE style. And I know that it's technically ECW, but ECW is owned by WWE. Did an agent or Vince or anybody come along and say, "Hey, Kurt, why don't you work a little bit with so-and-so, sort of take them under your wing"? Does that happen at all?
No, it didn't happen. I think a lot of the reason why is because Vince knew I was injured, and he didn't want me getting in the ring and, you know, teaching technique to the wrestlers. But they never asked me to do it. I just assumed that was the reason why.
Jason wants to know, the WWE influx of guys that they used starting out were guys Paul had worked with before, like Kurt, Big Show, etc. Was that Paul Heyman's idea to just use sort of quote unquote Paul Heyman guys?
I would say yes. I don't know for sure, but Paul Heyman worked really well with Big Show and I. He worked well with certain individuals, and he wanted those guys on his ECW roster. And I didn't blame him. I love Paul Heyman. I loved his ideas, his concepts. He's one of the best promoters in the world. You know, his mind, his creative mind is incredible. And I've always had faith in Paul. So I knew that he would eventually pick me to be an ECW, and Big Show got along with him really well too. And that's the reason why they, you know, moved us over to ECW, because Paul Heyman loved us.
Guy walks into a bar, says, would you have continued those incredible high octane matches long term if you weren't going through hard times? This is my absolute favorite version of your wrestling persona. I daydream about what ECW Kurt Angle would have been like a year down the road. What do you think?
Well, the Wrestling Machine was my favorite character. I actually liked it better than my Olympic Hero character, where I did a lot of comedy and I was kind of corny and, you know, an idiot. But I really enjoyed doing that stuff. But the Wrestling Machine was more me. That's who I am. That's what I was. And I enjoyed doing it. And I loved performing in those matches, because it was all technical, and that was what I was all about. You know, I wanted to portray myself as a wrestling machine, a wrestler in the ring that was the best wrestler in the world. And I think I did a pretty good job of that. And that's what my ECW character was about, the Wrestling Machine.
Here's one from Umar. He says, Kurt, what was it like backstage with the ECW originals like Sandman and Tommy Dreamer? Tommy Dreamer is universally beloved, so I think I know the answer to that. But Sandman, he could be a character at times. You got any good Sandman stories?
No, Sandman was behaved very well. You know, we were expecting him to do some crazy shit, but he was really cool. He didn't do anything. He was very calm, very in control. That, you know, those guys are characters, though. I met them back in the 90s, and you know, they were mostly drunk before the show even started. So, you know, they changed quite a bit when they came to WWE.
Martin wants to know, whose idea was it to start using a stiff headbutt during this 2006 era? I remember both the Brooklyn Brawler and Just Incredible being on the wrong end of a Glasgow kiss. And it's funny, Just Incredible actually responded, quote, it was a work. He barely touched me. But the headbutt spot, That is something that we hadn't seen in a long time. And you didn't just bring back any old headbutt. It wasn't an 80s Southern wrestling headbutt. This was a fighting headbutt. Whose idea was this?
It was a stiff headbutt. It was my idea. I thought it would go well with the intense wrestling machine Kurt Angle, even though it's not a wrestling move, but it is a badass move. And I thought that would help my character out by giving headbutts. And I have a very hard head, so I'm not afraid to hit anybody with it.
I know you were going by the end, but Ari has a great question. He says, why do you think the ECW revival eventually failed? Do you have an opinion why it didn't work long term?
Well, the WWE tried to make it into something that it wasn't, because they couldn't do certain things. They couldn't do the risky stuff. WWE is a family-oriented show, and they're a publicly traded company. They can't do the most extreme stuff and the adult content that ECW was providing in the 90s. So they weren't able to be the original ECW. If you're not the original ECW, there's no way you're going to work out. That's my opinion.
Here's another from Matt. Were there any types of weapons or gimmick matches that Kurt was reluctant to use or get hit with? Was there something you didn't enjoy about the quote unquote gimmicks?
I didn't want to get hit by anything. I'm not a gimmick guy. Don't want to be a gimmick guy. Never used gimmicks. Didn't want them used on me. But if I did have a gimmick match, I would do it. I never turned it down. It didn't matter what it was, but ECW wasn't going to be any different than WWE. I might have wrestled some little bit dangerous wrestlers, but for the most part, I knew that I would have to take a chair shot here, a kendo stick there. There are a lot of gimmicks in ECW, and you have to be willing to take something, but it's not going to be any worse than I would have been on Raw or Smack.
It's hilarious the way you phrase that though. A chair shot here, a kendo stick there, here a table, there a ladder. Let's go off of that for a minute, because a lot of us, thankfully have never had to fall on a ladder, and I hope we never do. But if you had to work with a ladder or a table, what would you prefer?
Oh man. Well, the ladder is a little stiffer. The table's probably it's more, I guess, not as stiff is what I'm trying to say. So I prefer the table. The table seems a lot safer too.
Chair shot or kendo stick?
Kendo stick. Kendo stick stings. Chair shot can hurt. You can knock you out. You don't know what can happen. It can break your neck like Brock did with me when he hit me with a chair over the head. I think that was 2003. And I don't like the chair shots. I would rather take a kendo stick.
Barbed wire or thumbtacks?
Thumbtacks. Barbed wire can cut you up pretty badly. I don't mind a few tacks being stuck in my back. That's not such a bad thing.
Do you remember the first time that was presented to you? Because I just can't help but remember, as we're having this conversation, this is an amateur wrestler his whole life. So good that he won the freaking Olympics with a broken freaking neck. And now we're going to bring him a canvas bag and say, so tonight we're going to use thumbtacks. What were you thinking when they first pitched that idea to you? Thumbtacks?
I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm going to do this. You know what? It's not that bad. I was nervous before I did it, but afterward, it wasn't so bad. It's a quick pinch, and it's not as bad as people think it is. But you're going to have thumbtacks stuck in you all night, and you're going to have to pluck them out. But other than that, it's not that bad.
So you said that thumbtacks weren't as bad as you thought. What was worse than you thought? Do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, the announce table when I hit my head on the floor.
Oh, wow.
That was my match at SummerSlam against Triple H and The Rock. And, I would say the concrete floor is the stiffest thing in the world, but I was on the announce table when that occurred.
Hunter wants to know, if you would have stayed in WWE, do you think you would have had matches with CM Punk?
Without a doubt, yes. CM Punk didn't show up till after I left, but I would have loved to work with him. That kid was really talented. He could cut a promo just about as good or better than anybody. I would love to work with the kid. It would have been awesome.
You know, that brings up a good point, because I'm curious, when you're on the main roster and you're on TV every week and you're making shows, are you keeping up with what's happening on the quote unquote independents at all? Or is that something that's not really in your purview?
It wasn't on our radar. You know, we're so in tune to what we're doing, and we're working almost every day of the week. It's really hard to catch up on independent wrestling or other promotions. I mean, you know, I remember when I started in WWE, we were watching WCW backstage, you know, because of the wars. But other than that, we didn't have time to really follow the independent circuit to see who the next up and coming wrestlers were going to be. So we wouldn't really know who it was.
Did you hear about anybody coming in ECW where maybe you weren't paying attention, but some of the other guys in the back would say, "Oh man, I hear so-and-so might be coming in and you won't believe this guy." And they just sort of say whatever. What was there buzz about who could be potentially coming in that you recall?
No, I don't recall of anybody that was upset or excited about anybody that was going to come in and join ECW. So that wasn't really discussed.
I know you weren't there very long, and we talked about it at the very beginning. When you're told that you're going to ECW, it's just you and Vince. It's not necessarily you and Heyman. But did you ever get one of those famous Heyman speeches at all?
Well, Paul talked to me before I went out the first night in ECW. I believe it was a TV, and I couldn't remember where it was. And he said, "There's a reason I picked you, number one. You go out and you do what you do best. You wrestle. That's what I brought you on to do." And that's what he said to me.
Here's a good one from Greg. Had you stayed longer in the WWE in 06, do you know what the plan was for you in ECW?
Well, I know the plan was to get me the ECW world title by the end of the year. Of course, that never happened because I quit by August. So, I never got to see it come to fruition.
Jack wants to know, were you looking forward to a supposed lighter schedule in ECW?
I knew it wasn't going to be a lighter schedule. I knew it was going to be the same schedule. It was going to be 4 or 5 days a week, 4 or 5 shows a week. And just like Raw and SmackDown, I knew that I might have to do some extreme matches. But other than that, there was no difference.
Here's one from Rosso Porco. He says, what was your favorite match during the ECW era?
The ECW era, right? So we're talking just ECW wrestlers, or are we talking that era? Like the era.
We'll go like May to August, you know, in that brief ECW, WWE ECW run.
I would say when my one night stand match against Randy Orton. Randy was awesome to work with. He was really young at the time, but he was still very well posed, and we had a great match. It was really awesome.
Is there an ECW original you enjoyed matches with? Most of our listeners don't count Randy as an ECW performer, of course. Do you have another, did you have a good match with Van Dam you enjoyed, or Sandman, or Tommy, or Sabu?
I had some great matches with RVD. I wrestled him at a few house shows. The one in particular that I got injured, that was an awesome match. It was near the end when I got injured, but we were able to put on a good 25-minute performance, and it was an awesome match. I believe it was in New York, upstate New York.
It is interesting to look back at this era and think about what a different time it was in wrestling. You know, at that point, ECW's been down for 5 years, WCW's been down for 5 years, and they're just trying to create whatever sort of nostalgia they can for the Monday Night War, and they even bring back some of these ECW originals. Sergio wants to know, how well did the originals get along with you and the other talent? You sort of alluded to that earlier, that they were all cool guys. Do you remember there being sort of a styles clash with anyone else, though, where for whatever reason so-and-so didn't get along with such and such?
No, there was no problem in the locker room. The guys and girls were cool. Everybody got along. It was a harmonic locker room that all worked together really well. No problems at all, period. Which is surprising. I mean, considering.
You got to get excited about saving people all those dollars. They can limousine ride and jet fly now with that extra cash.
And they can style and profile with a quick 10-minute phone call right now to 425-0105.
That's 425-0105.
Woo!
SaveWithConrad.com.
You're going to have a lot of egos in there, and a lot of ECW originals that, wanted it to be still original and no WWE wrestlers, but it wasn't like that. Everybody got along.
Kellen brings up a great question. He wants to know, considering the unfortunate situation you had at the ECW arena before, this was before you're even in the WWE, but everybody remembers they did the ill-advised crucifixion angle. You weren't comfortable with it. You walked out. That felt like the end of you in pro wrestling. We've talked about it in the archives. Go check it out. But now you're working back with Paul Heyman in a more direct manner. And of course, you had done that prior to this in the WWE. But now that it feels like it's got his creative stamp on it, did you have any concerns about what the content might be, or that you could trust him? Because you sort of alluded to earlier in one earlier episode that you felt like when Paul came to you and said, "Oh, I didn't know they were going to do that," in regards to the crucifixion angle, I think the phrase you used was, he was full of shit. Did you think that Paul Heyman was somebody you could trust at this point, or was that just water under the bridge?
It was water under the bridge, but I also wanted to make sure that whatever Paul Heyman did, Vince had to approve first. So I knew that, Vince, running Paul Heyman, who was running the promotion, Vince was still the boss, and he was going to make the final decision. I trusted Paul because I trusted Vince. So I think that, Vince being the head honcho of the whole situation made me feel more at ease.
So chat me up about the endpoint. It feels like when Vince comes to you and he says, "Hey, I'm launching this new brand. I want you to be the face of it." And you're concerned about money, and he calms that fear. It feels like he might say, "This isn't forever. I just need to get this thing up and running. We're going to have you here for 6 months or a year or 18 months, or by WrestleMania, we'll have you back." Is there an endpoint discussed with Vince, or do you think just for the foreseeable future, this is it?
I just think that he never discussed anything of the length period of time or anything like that. He just wanted me to be the name and face of ECW. And I figured it was going to run as long as ECW ran. So, I was willing to do it. I just, at the time I needed a lot of rest. I needed to be at home to nurse my injuries, and I couldn't afford to go there because they just started a new promotion, and a bunch of guys on the SmackDown and Raw roster were injured. So I didn't have any time to really heal. I had to continue on until somebody could replace me.
Gil Boldberg wants to know, was Foley injured when you attacked him on Raw after it was announced you were going to ECW? Based on your demeanor coming to the ring, it looked like a shoot. Okay, I'm sure it wasn't a shoot, but what do you remember about that night and working with Foley? Foley at this point was not necessarily super active in the ring. He would come back here and there, but he is somebody you probably wanted to be a little more careful with. He's not on a touring brand at the time. He's not callous to taking bumps 4 or 5 days a week. What do you remember about that interaction with Foley when you announced that you're going to ECW?
Well, I just remember, laying Mick out, and, Mick, he was a guy that would tell you, "Listen, I'll do whatever you want me to do." So he was willing to do whatever had to be done that night. He would have taken a suplex from the top rope. He would have jumped off the ladder. Mick Foley will do anything, anytime. And that's how he is. That's the kind of guy he is. He's willing to put his body on the line no matter how banged up he is, or if he's not banged up. He's going to do it regardless. And I knew that about Mick. And, we talked about what we wanted to do that night, and he was cool with it.
We can't talk about your experience in ECW without talking about Alan Jackson. His comment is, do you find it ironic that RVD had his title stripped for weed when so much of the roster was on drugs or steroids? Do you know what the plans were long term for RVD as champion? So let's attack those one at a time. You said earlier, I felt like I was going to be ECW world champion. Did you assume that would be with a pay-per-view match with Rob Van Dam?
I didn't know. You know, I knew that Rob was going to win the title, and you know, I probably would eventually have beaten him. I don't know where they were going to go with it, because I think that at the time we were both baby faces, but I didn't really know when I would win the title. I just knew it was being talked about.
Now let's talk about the drug component. And you've been open and honest about your struggles with painkillers. Even earlier in this same show, there was a fair or not, there was a sort of understood in the business that ECW was a little more liberal with their drug policy, or lack thereof. Did you see a different lifestyle with those guys? Unfortunately, so many of them, like Axel and of course Balls Mahoney, we've lost from drug overdoses. Was it apparent that other guys were really struggling with their substance abuse in the ECW locker room?
I didn't see a lot of substance abuse. You know, I think that Rob getting hit for marijuana, you know, it kind of sucks, because, you know, nowadays marijuana is legal.
No big deal.
But, you know, back then it was a big issue. And it's one of the big no-nos that you weren't allowed to do. You weren't allowed to take drugs, and you weren't allowed to take steroids. And Rob wasn't the only one that got titles stripped from him or got suspended. Yeah. I got suspended because I failed a drug test. If you're going to fail a drug test, whether it's marijuana, painkillers, steroids, it doesn't matter what it is, you're going to have, the company's going to do something. They're going to suspend you or fine you or both. And with Rob, they decided to strip the title from him, and they probably fined him. But, you know, that's a chance you take when you're going to smoke weed. And I'm saying this, you know, today you can smoke weed where just about anywhere you want to, but back then you couldn't. So that was one of the topics of this, you know, the discussion was, should weed be a drug that is illegal? And back then it really was.
You know, weed is obviously being decided by the different states. You know, it's ever evolving. Just recently in Alabama, it was, I think it's official now that it's okay for medical use. And that's, of course, the first step based on what we've seen in California and other places. But my question to you is in regards to a derivative of that. That's an Eric Bischoff word. CBD. Is that something that you have found useful in your recovery, or is that something that is really not on your radar?
I've tried CBD. It works. The cream works on my joints for a good hour. It doesn't last really long, but you know, it is effective if you want to get a workout in, so you're not sore before you start training. But you know, it doesn't do anything long term for me. So I wasn't that excited about it. You know, it is what it is. I think it does reduce swelling temporarily, and that's a good thing. And I think if you want to use CBD, go ahead and use it. It's a pretty safe product.
Do you know what the WWE's marijuana policy is now? Obviously you don't, I mean, you're not there today, but I mean, before the pandemic, when you're still touring, and it's legal in so many states here in America, but it is still sort of a gray area. Had the WWE, as far as you know, sort of loosened up on their marijuana policy just based on it becoming legal in so many states?
Well, I think that the WWE, what they are doing right now, and I don't know if it's changed since I left, but they would just fine the wrestler. So you're going to get drug tested 7 times a year. If you're going to fail 7 times a year, and this is one of the wrestlers, this is what I heard one of the wrestlers said, and I might as well say who it is, Randy Orton and Rob Van Dam. They basically told the company that they would, how much are the fines and how many drug tests will I do this year? So they wanted to pay the money up front.
That's hilarious.
So I think the fine was $2,000. So they just said, here, take 14 grand. I'm good. So they would bypass the tests and they wouldn't get suspended. So I think marijuana, they've been lighter on about, because it's not banned anymore. You don't get suspended, but you still get fined.
You know, I know some people are going to take issue with that and say it's a workaround, but I think marijuana is the one drug where it's like, man, if it's legal in, you know, a large portion of the country, it kind of is what it is, especially if you're touring and you're in those states and you're doing what's legal. you know, for years it's been legal in Nevada. And if the WWE ran a show in Nevada and guys went and had dinner and then afterwards had an edible and a few beers, I don't see how they could get in trouble. They should not get in trouble for that, in my opinion. Like, it's legal here. I'm not breaking any laws. And I don't know. That's probably.
I totally agree. If it's legal in that state and you're doing it that night, it should be fine. You know, if you get drug tested that week, you should say, well, I was in Nevada.
Yeah.
Smoked some weed when I was there. And so I shouldn't be fined or suspended. I agree with you because it was a legal process. You
right.
You did do it in a legal state. So I don't see why marijuana is even an issue today. It should be done. No more fining, no more suspending.
I totally agree. I'm curious. I know you weren't watching wrestling back then, but did any of the old timers ever tell you about the Hacksaw Jim Duggan Iron Sheik marijuana arrest back in the day that brought so much shame to the WWF?
Is that when Iron Sheik stuffed something in Hacksaw's bag or something?
You know, there's a good guy and a bad guy, and they get pulled over, and they had marijuana in the car. So they were quote unquote breaking kayfabe, and they had marijuana in the car, and they're supposed to be, you know, heroes to children, so they can sell dolls. And it was a black eye. And so for a lot of time, I think people thought that will be on the list forever. And then here it pops up again, but this time it's not, you know, a baby face and a heel so much as it as the world champion. And so that gets headlines everywhere, you know, in this clickbait society we live in. If you can, you know, arrest the WWE champion with a drug charge, that's going to get headlines everywhere.
Oh, without a doubt, that would definitely get headlines. And I didn't know about Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Iron Sheik getting stopped, and they were smoking marijuana, and they were babyface and heel. Didn't they had a program together at the time, right?
Yeah. So, you know, at the arena, we hate each other. We're Iran versus America, but then, hey, let's go get a doob and make the next town. So shouldn't have done that for a variety of reasons. Let's do Matthew Spanks. He says, we know you didn't want to go to ECW, and you said you would do whatever Vince wanted you to do. What led you to that? Just having ultimate trust in Vince. A lot of guys sort of put their foot down and say, you know, that doesn't work for me, brother. But that doesn't seem like that was really even in your vocabulary. But it's happening at a time where you're really breaking down. You're frustrated with Vince. You're sending rude or angry or upset text messages, whatever, you know, descriptor you want to use. But then when he asks you, hey, will you do it? You just agree. Is this just because you're so all over the place and you're behaving erratically, or is it one thing to have that conversation with Vince on the phone, but then in person, man, he just charms the pants off of you?
Well, Vince was a father figure to me, so I would do whatever he asked me to do it. I had full trust in him. It's just at the time, you know, I wasn't able to get a hold of him because of my erratic behavior. And I think Vince was dodging me on purpose to teach me a lesson. You know what? I was mad when he asked me. You know, he said, listen, I want you to be the name and face of a new promotion. And I'm like, what's the promotion? He's like, ECW. And I was like, why? You know, I didn't know why. And he was like, well, let me warn you too, you're going to make less money work in small arenas. I said, well, I'm not going to do that, Vince. Why would I want to do that? So I was giving him attitude that day, but he persuaded me. He kept talking to me, and he kind of coerced me into agreeing with him. So Vince does have a psychology when he meets with guys, and he makes you feel good about the decision he just made for you. Vince is really good at that. He's a great talker.
Let's talk about the ECW crowd for a moment. They're some of the most, especially the, you know, back in the day, the most hardcore fans around. They made, you know, things like, boy, this is not something I ever thought I'd say on a podcast. Show your tits a chant, and they made you fucked up a chant. They chant everything, and it's sometimes not that polite. Did you ever get some of those chants in one of your matches and think, wait a minute, what the hell's going on?
No, I didn't. For some reason, the ECW crowd loved Kurt Angle, the wrestling machine. I didn't have any problems. I guess I never fucked up or or missed the spot while I was wrestling for ECW, so I didn't get to hear those. But I heard that they're pretty rowdy. They're very passionate fans, and I remember when I wrestled Randy, they were chanting the whole night. They were on fire. It was just, it was a different breed of a crowd. It was pretty awesome.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.